The depot manager said it 3 times before Garrison Delk actually heard him. "She's been sitting there since 8:30, mister. 8:30, that's 3 hours. 3 hours on a wooden bench at the Holbrook bus depot, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like a trapped insect, with a backpack on her lap that she would not put down, and a piece of paper folded in her left hand that she would not open. She was 7 years old. She had told the manager her name was Cora. She had told him her father was coming. She had not cried, not once, which the manager said was the part that scared him most, and 512 bikers would later understand exactly why. What happened next inside that depot has been talked about in diners and at gas stations from Winslow to Seligman for 3 years running, and the telling never gets smaller. It gets larger each time, the way true things do. You think you know what a man like that would do when he walked through those glass doors and saw a 7-year-old girl sitting alone with a folded piece of paper and 3 hours of patience behind her eyes. You think you know. You were not ready for the reason. The morning had come in flat and colorless, the kind of July dawn that arrives over the high desert without warmth, the sun already hidden behind a shelf of dust haze that pressed down on the creosote and the pale caliche hardpan like a lid. The temperature would hit 104 by noon. At 7:45 it was already 86, and the air smelled of diesel and old asphalt, and the ghost of last night's rain that had evaporated before it reached the ground. Garrison Delk had been awake since 4. He was 54 years old, 6 feet and change, with a chest like a railroad tie and hands that had been reshaping their own knuckles since his 20s, work hands, scarred across the back and permanently dark in the creases from engine grease that no amount of lava soap had ever fully surrendered. His beard was iron-going rust, cut square at the jaw, and it had been that color since before he stopped counting the years. He wore a faded black cut, the Ash Creek Riders patch, centered between his shoulder blades, the bottom rocker reading Arizona, and he had been wearing a version of that cut for 26 years, since the club had 9 members and no reputation, and a borrowed garage on the edge of Ash Creek, where the power went out every time somebody ran a welder. He was the last of the 9 still riding. That was not a distinction he advertised. It was just a weight he carried the way a man carries something that has become part of the distribution of himself, barely felt unless he put it down, which he never did. He had been heading north on Route 77, no particular destination except away from the quiet of his house, when his phone rang through the Bluetooth in his helmet, and the voice on the other end belonged to Del Pruitt, who ran the diner across from the depot, and who had Garrison's number because Garrison had jump-started her delivery truck twice in the past year. "Garrison," Del said, "there is a little girl here by herself and I don't know who to call, and I called you." He did not ask why she called him instead of the sheriff's office. He already knew. Sometimes the thing a situation needs is not a report. He swung the bike around on the center line and rode toward Holbrook with the throttle open. He came through the depot's glass doors at 11:23, and the fluorescent light caught the silver in his beard, and the road dust on his jacket, and the full weight of the Ash Creek Riders patch, and the 3 other people in the waiting area, a woman with a rolling suitcase, an old man with a paper cup of coffee, and the depot manager himself. All went still, in the way people go still when something large and uncertain enters a room. Garrison did not look at any of them. He looked at the girl on the bench. She was small, the way 7-year-olds are small when the bench they are sitting on was built for adults, feet not quite reaching the floor, backpack on her knees like a shield she had decided to keep. Her hair was brown, pulled into a braid that had been done carefully some hours ago and was now coming loose at the sides. She was wearing a yellow shirt with a pocket on the chest and jeans with a frayed cuff on the left leg, and her sneakers were the kind that had once lit up at the heel but didn't anymore. She was watching the door, not the door Garrison had come through, a different door, the one that faced the parking lot. She had been watching that door for 3 hours. He stood 12 feet away and did not move, and he took a breath, and then he walked to the bench and sat down on the far end of it, not close, not looming, just present, and he rested his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor the way a person looks at the floor when they are trying to take up less space than their body allows. He sat there for a while. The depot was quiet except for the fluorescent buzz and the distant idle of a bus engine somewhere behind the building. Then he said, "You want some water?" She looked at him, not with fear, with the precise, calibrating look of a child who has already decided that fear is not a useful tool in the current situation. "I'm waiting," she said. "I know," Garrison said. "You want water while you wait?" She thought about it. "Okay," she said. He got up, got 2 bottles from the vending machine against the wall, came back and set one on the bench between them without touching her side of the bench, and opened his own. She picked hers up, opened it herself, and drank. She kept the folded piece of paper in her left hand the whole time. He could see now that it had been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases were soft, almost worn through at the center, the way paper gets when someone has been reading it and putting it away and reading it again for a long time. He did not ask about it. He looked at the parking lot door instead, the one she kept watching, and he said, "What time did he say he'd be here?" 8 o'clock, Cora said. Garrison nodded. He kept looking at the door. "Your mom know where you are?" The girl was quiet. The depot was quiet. The fluorescent light buzzed. "My mom's in Tucson," she said, and there was something in the way she said it. Not sad, just geographical, just a fact placed next to another fact that settled in Garrison's chest like a stone finding the bottom of water. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You live with your dad?" "I live with my grandma," Cora said, "but my dad said he was going to get me. He said he got a place now. He said 8 o'clock. She looked at the parking lot door again. Garrison looked at his own hands. In his left palm he could still feel the callus that had formed over the years from the clutch lever, a hard ridge of skin like a seam, and he pressed his right thumb into it, a habit he had when he was working something out. Del Pruitt was watching from the doorway of the diner across the street, visible through the glass. The depot manager was pretending to sort papers at the counter, but watching over his shoulder every few seconds. The woman with the rolling suitcase had gone back to her phone, but she wasn't reading it anymore, just holding it and watching Cora in the way people watch something that makes them afraid. Garrison noticed all of this without turning his head. He had been noticing rooms for 30 years. He was very good at it. "What's your grandma's name?" he said. "Nona Birch," Cora said. "She lives on Clover Road, in Joseph City. You hungry?" She considered this with the same gravity she gave everything. "Kind of." "Okay," he said. He pulled out his phone and typed a name into it, and while he typed, he said, "I'm going to call someone to bring you something to eat, and I'm going to stay here with you until your dad gets here. That sound okay?" Cora looked at him for a long time. She was doing that calibrating thing again, reading something in his face that she either found acceptable or didn't, and the fact that she was 7 years old and doing it this carefully and this quietly was the part that had been sitting in Garrison's sternum like something broken since the moment he walked in. "You're a biker," she said. "Yes." "Are you mean?" "Not to people who didn't earn it," he said. She appeared to accept this as a reasonable policy. She turned back toward the parking lot door. "Okay," she said. "You can stay." He sent 3 texts before he stood up. The first was to Del Pruitt, "Food for a kid, whatever you've got, no rush but soon." The second was to a man named Tomas Reyes, who was the Ash Creek Riders' sergeant-at-arms, and who had a brother-in-law in the Navajo County Sheriff's Office. The third was to the group thread the club used for everything from ride schedules to bail logistics, and it said only, "Holbrook Bus Depot, 7-year-old girl, father's a no-show, I need eyes on this situation." That was 12:31 in the afternoon. By 12:45, Tomas had called back with a name. By 1 o'clock, Del Pruitt had crossed the street with a grilled cheese sandwich and a cup of chocolate milk and set them on the bench beside Cora without making a production of it. Just set them down the way you set something down for someone who is doing something hard and doesn't need an audience. By 1:15, the first 4 bikes had rolled into the depot parking lot, and Cora watched them arrive through the glass of the parking lot door with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, and was something in between that had no clean name. Garrison saw her see them. He said nothing. He was on the phone. Tomas Reyes stood just inside the depot entrance with his arms folded, which was how he stood when he was doing 2 things at once, listening and deciding. He was 48, built like a middleweight 10 years past the title, and still dangerous, with a scar along his jaw from a fall in 2019 that he described, to anyone who asked, as a disagreement with gravity. He had served as sergeant-at-arms for the Ash Creek Riders for 11 years, and in those 11 years he had learned to read Garrison Delk the way a navigator reads weather, by the set of his shoulders and the tempo of his breathing and what he did with his hands. What Garrison was doing now was pressing his thumb into the palm callus and looking at the parking lot door. Tomas did not need more information than that. He stepped back outside and made 2 phone calls of his own. The name his brother-in-law had given him was Raymond Cura, 31 years old. Last known address, a motel off I-40 in Gallup. Outstanding warrant out of Bernalillo County for a skipped court date on a possession charge. No felonies, no history of violence. Phone registered in New Mexico and currently unreachable. Raymond Cura had told his daughter he would be at the Holbrook bus depot at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was now past 1 in the afternoon, and no one in any system Tomas's brother-in-law could access had seen or heard from Raymond Cura since a gas station transaction in Gallup 2 days ago. Tomas walked back inside and stood next to Garrison and said quietly, "He's not coming today." Garrison did not answer. The way the room didn't answer instead was its own kind of answer. Cora had finished the grilled cheese. She had drunk most of the chocolate milk. She was holding the folded piece of paper again, turning it between her fingers the way you turn something you already know and are not yet ready to put away. Garrison sat back down on the bench. The depot had 3 more people in it now, bikers from the lot who had come inside quietly, without asking, and positioned themselves near the doors and the windows in the way men do when they are keeping watch without wanting to be noticed keeping watch. Cora noticed. She was 7. She noticed everything. She looked at the one nearest the vending machine, a broad man named Curtis Vane, who rode sweep on most club runs and who was currently studying the label on a bag of pretzels with the intense focus of someone trying not to be seen. "Is that your friend?" she asked Garrison. "That's Curtis," Garrison said. "He's family." She considered this. "He's reading pretzels," she said. "He does that," Garrison said. Something happened at the corner of Cora's mouth that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. It was there for a second and then it was gone, and she turned back to the door. The paper was in her hands. Garrison looked at it and looked away, and then he said, as quietly as he had said anything, "What's on the paper, Cora?" She did not answer right away. She looked at the door for another long moment, and then she looked at the paper, and then she said, "He wrote me a letter last Christmas. It says he's going to come get me. It says he's going to get a place with a yard." She turned the paper over once in her hands. "I bring it everywhere in case I forget what it says." The depot was quiet except for the buzz and the idle and, outside, the low rumble of more bikes pulling into the lot. Curtis Vane set down the pretzels. He did not look at Garrison or at Cora. He looked at the wall, and his jaw worked once and he was still. Garrison pressed his thumb into the callus and thought about a letter that had been folded and unfolded until the creases went soft. Thought about a child who carried a promise in her left hand for 6 months because she believed in it more than she believed in anything she could see, and something behind his sternum shifted the way ice shifts in late March, audible and slow and irreversible. He thought about his own daughter, who was not 7 and had not been 7 in 17 years, and he let himself think about her for exactly as long as it took to take one breath, and then he set the thought down and stood up and walked outside to make the call he had been working up to since 12:31. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it was done, Garrison came back inside, sat down, and said to Cora, "Your grandma's going to come get you. She'll be here in about 40 minutes. Cora looked at him. "Did you call my dad?" "We're working on that," he said. Which was true. It was not all that was true, but it was true. She turned back to the door and she folded the letter one more time, and she put it in the front pocket of her yellow shirt, in the pocket on the chest, and she put her hand over it for a moment, and then put her hand down. "Okay," she said. She was 7 years old, and she had been waiting 3 hours and 22 minutes, and she had not cried once. And she said okay, the way someone says it when they have already made the internal adjustment and are ready to wait again. Garrison looked at his hands. Tomas, from near the entrance, looked at the ceiling. Curtis Vane looked at his own boots, and his reflection looked back up at him from the polished concrete, and neither one of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the room had not already said. Nona Birch arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon. She was 67, small and quick, with white hair pulled back and eyeglasses on a chain around her neck, wearing a house dress and sneakers that said she had left in a hurry and not cared what she put on her feet. She came through the glass doors and saw Cora and crossed the room without breaking stride, and Cora stood up from the bench with the backpack, and Nona put both arms around her and held on. She was shaking. Not Cora. Nona. She held on for a long time, and then she straightened up and looked at Garrison, who had stood up when she came in, and was now standing at his full height and his full width with the iron beard and the road dust, and the Ash Creek rider's patch centered between his shoulder blades, and she looked at him with eyes that had been doing math very fast, and had arrived at a number. "You stayed with her," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Garrison said. Nona Birch looked at the 5 other bikers positioned around the depot and at the parking lot through the glass, where there were now 11 motorcycles in a row with their riders standing beside them in the afternoon light, and she made a sound that was not quite a word and put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she took it down. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know your name." "Garrison Delk," he said. "I'm sorry we're meeting this way." She nodded. She looked at Cora. "Are you ready, sweet girl?" Cora picked up the backpack. She put it on both shoulders. She looked at Garrison. "You said you're working on calling my dad," she said. "Will you tell him I waited?" The depot was absolutely still. The fluorescent light buzzed. Garrison Delk, who had been president of the Ash Creek Riders for 14 years and had not let anyone see him come undone in longer than that, put his hand on the top of his chest and kept it there for a moment, flat, the way you hold something that needs to stay where it is. "I'll tell him," he said. "I promise." She nodded once, the way someone nods when they have received the answer they needed and have filed it where it belongs. She walked out the parking lot door beside her grandmother, and she did not look at the parking lot full of motorcycles except once, at the very end, just a glance, and then she got into Nona's car, and the car pulled away. Garrison watched it go. Behind him he could hear Curtis Vane clear his throat twice in quick succession, which was Curtis's version of composing himself, and he could hear Tomas's boot on the concrete as he shifted his weight, and he could hear the fluorescent light, still buzzing, and the distant idle of the bus engine that had been running this whole time somewhere out of sight, patient and mechanical, keeping time. Garrison turned back to the room. He looked at his phone. He looked at the group thread, which now had 47 replies in it, all of them variations on the same question, "What do you need?" He typed, "More." He typed, "Bring everyone." He sent it and looked at the parking lot door where Cora had stood with her backpack and her letter and her 3+ hours of waiting, and he thought about what she had said. "Will you tell him I waited?" And he thought about the particular shape of that sentence, the way it was not. Why didn't he come, and not "he lied to me," but just a request to carry a message, to deliver news that she had held up her end? And it hit him then with the full weight of what it was, which was a 7-year-old child extending the benefit of the doubt across a silence that had already used up every reasonable excuse. And Garrison understood that kind of faith because he had watched it fail in his own life and had never quite worked out how to account for the wreckage it left. Tomas came up beside him. "What's the play?" "We find Raymond Cura," Garrison said. "We find out what happened, and then we figure out what Cora needs, and we make sure she gets it." "That's going to take more than tonight," Tomas said. "I know," Garrison said. He was still looking at the door. It had started with a phone call from a diner owner to the one person in her phone who she figured would not make the situation worse. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, it was something else. The Ash Creek Riders had a protocol for rides, and a protocol for roadside assistance, and a protocol for the rare and ugly situations that required the club to move as something other than a recreational association. And Garrison activated that third protocol at 3:47 by sending a single follow-up message to the group thread that contained a meeting location, a time, and 3 words: "This is serious." Tomas left for Joseph City to sit with Nona Birch and learn what Nona knew about Raymond Cura and the arrangement that had put Cora on a bus at 7 in the morning with a backpack and a Christmas letter folded in her fist. Garrison sent Curtis Vane and a member named Beto Salcedo to the depot manager to collect whatever information the man had: what time Cora's bus had arrived, whether anyone had been with her, whether she had said anything to anyone in the depot before Dell called Garrison. The manager was a man named Phil Ostroff, who was going to retire in 8 months and who had been in a low-grade state of distress since 8:30 that morning. And when Curtis sat down with him and said, "Start from when you first noticed her," Phil Ostroff talked for 40 minutes and did not stop except to drink coffee, and once, briefly, to take his glasses off and clean them, which was the kind of pause that is not about glasses. He had offered to call the police at 9 o'clock. Cora had said no. She said her dad was just running late and she was okay. And Phil had believed her because he had spent 30 years managing a bus depot and he could tell the difference between a child in danger and a child who had made a decision. And this child had made a decision, and it scared him more than the other thing would have. He had called Dell Pruitt at 10 because Dell's diner was across the street, and Dell had good judgment, and Dell had waited and watched through the diner window until 11 and then called Garrison. And that was the whole chain. 4 people and 2.5 hours of doing the thing most likely to be right, in a situation that had no clean answer. Curtis wrote it all down in a notebook with a spiral top. Beto photographed the bench. Neither of them explained why. The club meeting convened at the Ash Creek Riders' regular space, a bay in a rented commercial building off the frontage road east of Winslow, at 6 that evening. Garrison stood at the front, no table, no notes, in the same road-dusted cut he had been wearing all day. He did not give a speech. He told them what had happened in the order that it happened, starting with Dell Pruitt's phone call and ending with Cora's question, "Will you tell him I waited?" Then he told them what Tomas had learned in Joseph City. Nona Birch had raised Cora since age 4, when Cora's mother had gone to Tucson, and the informal custody arrangement that people call family and courts call something else had settled into place. Raymond Cora visited when he could, called when he remembered, and sent letters at irregular intervals that Cora kept in a shoebox under her bed. The Christmas letter had arrived in late November. Raymond had called Nona in June to say he was getting himself straight. He had a job at a building supply outside Holbrook. He was going to get a small place. He wanted Cora to come for the summer. Nona had said yes because Raymond was not a bad man. He was a man losing a war with himself, and she had learned to tell the difference, and because Cora wanted to go, and a child wanting to believe in her father is not a problem you solve by taking the father away. The bus ticket had been Raymond's idea. He had sent the money for it. Nona had put Cora on the 7:15 out of Joseph City that morning, with a packed backpack and the Christmas letter in her pocket. She had not called Raymond when 8 o'clock passed because she thought he was running late. She had called at 9, and the phone went to voicemail. At 10, she had called the depot, and Phil Ostroff had told her Cora was fine. She was sitting on the bench. She was waiting. Nona had started to get in her car at 10:15, and Cora had been called to the phone and had told her not to. She was fine. She was waiting. Nona had gotten in the car anyway at 12:30 when Garrison had called her himself, and in the car she had prayed 2 prayers, one that Cora was okay and one that Raymond was not in a ditch somewhere, and she was still waiting to hear about the second one. Tomas said all of this in roughly 6 minutes, standing at Garrison's left, factual and flat, and the room of 43 men did not move while he talked. When he finished, there was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds, which is a long time in a room of 43 people. Then a man named Roy Senda, who was 60 and had been riding with the Ash Creek Riders for 18 years and who almost never spoke in meetings, said from the back of the room, "What do we do first?" Garrison looked at Roy. He looked at the room. "First, we find Raymond Cura," he said. "Second, we find out if he needs help or if he made a choice. Third, we figure out what Cora needs. In that order." He looked at Tomas. Tomas coordinates with his contact at the sheriff's office. "Roy, I need you and whoever you pick to be the link to Nona Birch. She needs to know we're on this, and she needs to not have to ask." He looked at Curtis. "Curtis takes the information side, anything Phil Ostroff has, anything the depot has, any record of Raymond in the last 48 hours. He paused. "Everyone else is on standby. When I know what this needs, I'll tell you. Don't go home far." There was no vote. There was no discussion. 43 men, in the way of men who have built a shared language out of years of riding the same roads, simply began to do the things they had just been told to do. Chairs scraping, boots on concrete, phones coming out, and the room converted from a meeting into a machine in about 30 seconds. Garrison stood where he was and watched it happen, and then walked outside to the lot where his bike was parked, and he leaned against it and looked at the high desert dark that had come down over the scrub while they were inside, the stars immense and close over the high plateau, the way they only get in places far enough from any city that the sky remembers itself. He thought about Raymond Cura, 31 years old, who had sent a bus ticket and a job and a plan, and then disappeared into a 48-hour silence. He thought about Cora, with the letter in her pocket, folded soft at the creases, turning it in her fingers on the bench while she watched the wrong door. He had a daughter of his own who was 24 now and lived in Flagstaff, and who had watched a different door for a long time when Garrison was the one who kept not walking through it. He did not let himself go further with that thought than the factual part, the plain description, because the rest of it was not useful right now, and the useful part was enough of a weight to carry out here under the Arizona stars by himself in the dark. What he knew, standing there against his bike, was that he had made a promise to a 7-year-old girl. He had said he would tell her father she waited. A man who makes a promise like that has already decided what he is willing to do to keep it. The only question left was what keeping it was going to require. The answer to that question came at 11:47 that night in the form of a call from Tomas, who had been working his brother-in-law's contact chain for 6 hours. Raymond Cura had been found by Navajo County deputies at a motel in Holbrook, 3 miles from the bus depot, at 10:30 that morning, which was 2.5 hours after he was supposed to be at the depot, which meant he had not overslept, and not gotten lost, and not miscalculated the time. He had been in the room when the deputies arrived, and he had been conscious, and he had been, in the words Tomas used with the specificity of someone repeating a precise report, in a state of significant distress, which was the phrase Tomas used because it was the phrase his contact used. And what it meant in plain language was that Raymond Cura had spent the night before Cora was supposed to arrive trying to win back a losing battle with himself, and by 7 in the morning he had lost it so thoroughly that he could not stand up, could not find his phone, had lain on the motel room floor with Cora's bus ticket receipt on the table 3 feet away, and been unable to get to the door. He had been taken by ambulance to the Navajo County Medical Center. He was stable. He was not in danger. He was also not in any condition to have Cora for the summer, or for the foreseeable future beyond that, and he knew it. And Tomas said that the deputy who had found him said that the first thing Raymond had said when he could talk was, "She was at the depot." She was waiting. I couldn't. That was the whole of it. She was at the depot. She was waiting. I couldn't. It was 3 o'clock in the morning and Garrison was sitting in the bay on a folding chair when Tomas finished telling him, and he sat with it for a while, the whole shape of the day. The depot and the bench and the buzz of the light and the letter folded soft, and he thought about a man 3 miles away who had known at some point in the morning that his daughter was waiting and had not been able to get off the floor, and he tried to locate in that something he could be angry at, and the thing he found instead was not anger. It was a landscape he recognized, a man losing a war with himself, Nona had said. A child who carries a promise in her hand because she believes in it. Garrison knew both sides of that equation. He had been one and he had caused the other, a long time ago on different roads, and the accounting of it had never quite come out even. He pressed his thumb into the callus in his palm and made the decision that he had been circling since 12:31 in the afternoon, when he first sent that message to the group thread. He picked up his phone and he called Roy Senda. "Get me a count," he said. "Everyone who can be in Holbrook on Saturday. Everyone. Full run." Roy was quiet for a moment. "What are we doing in Holbrook on Saturday?" "We're making sure a little girl knows she's not forgotten," Garrison said. Another pause. Then Roy said, "I'll need more than the Ash Creek Riders for a number worth something." "Then call some people," Garrison said. "You've got 4 days." He had not told Roy what number he was aiming for. Roy figured it out by the way Garrison said it. That was the thing about a man who ran a club for 14 years. After a while, the people around him could feel the size of what he was thinking before he put it into words. Roy made 11 calls before sunrise. Each of those 11 people made calls of their own. By Thursday evening, the threat had gone out through channels that the Ash Creek Riders had built across 26 years of being the people you called when a situation required both conviction and a willingness to ride long miles without complaint. Riders from Flagstaff and Winslow and Show Low and Springerville began confirming. Riders from Albuquerque who had history with members of the club. Riders from Phoenix who knew Tomas's name. Riders from smaller clubs along the corridor who had been on the receiving end of an Ash Creek Riders favor at one time or another and had been waiting for the chance to square the ledger. Garrison watched the confirmations come in and said nothing about the number to anyone. He was watching it the way you watch a horizon for weather, waiting for it to become what it was going to be. Friday evening the count hit 340. Friday night it crossed 400. By Saturday morning, with riders still arriving from the 2-lane roads that fed into Holbrook from 4 directions, the count stood at 512. Roy Senda brought Garrison the number at 7:45 Saturday morning, standing outside the staging area they had set up in a gravel lot on the south side of Holbrook, in early light that came in gold and nearly horizontal off the desert, cutting long shadows behind every bike in the lot and turning the dust in the air the color of copper. 512 motorcycles, engines off, riders standing, waiting. Garrison stood at the edge of the lot and looked at the count on Roy's phone and then looked at the lot, the full length and breadth of it, the sea of cut leather and chrome and painted steel in the gold morning light, and he stood there long enough that Roy said quietly, You good?" "Yeah," Garrison said. He was not looking at the bikes anymore. He was looking at the road that led to Nona Birch's house in Joseph City, where Cora had been told to be ready at 8 o'clock, but had not been told for what. Garrison had talked to Nona on Thursday, a careful and specific conversation in which he had explained what he wanted to do and why, and asked her whether she thought Cora could receive it. And Nona had been quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, "She's been quiet all week. She's been carrying that letter around, but she hasn't looked at it since she got home. I think she put it away." A pause. "I think she might be done with it." Garrison had said, "She shouldn't have to be done with it," and Nona had said, "No, she shouldn't," so it was agreed. Nona would have Cora ready at 8. Roy would lead the column. Garrison would ride at the front beside Roy because that was where the president of the Ash Creek Riders rode, and because there was a promise he had made in a depot waiting room that he was not going to keep at a distance. The column out of Holbrook moved at 9 miles per hour, which was slow enough to be a procession and fast enough to feel like intent. 512 motorcycles in a line that stretched when the last rider pulled out of the gravel lot for nearly 3 miles behind Garrison's front wheel. The road to Joseph City ran northeast through the scrub, the high desert opening up on both sides, the creosote and the juniper gray-green in the morning gold, the sky above them the hard, brilliant blue that comes after the dust settles and the haze breaks. Garrison rode at the head and did not look back, but he could feel the column behind him the way you feel a current in deep water, something massive and directional and alive, and it pulled at the back of his collar and the backs of his hands and the base of his spine in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. Roy rode to his right. Tomas was 4 bikes back. Curtis Vane was riding sweep, last in line, from where he had reported the column stretched as far as he could see in both mirrors. Beto Salcedo had ridden ahead to Clover Road 40 minutes earlier and was now parked at the corner waiting to wave the column in. Every rider had been told the same thing in the briefing that morning. Engines stay on until the column stops, then off together, then quiet. Garrison had said, "She's 7 years old. She's had a loud week. Let's give her something she can hear in a quiet way." Nobody asked what that meant. They all understood what that meant. Beto was at the corner of Clover Road when the front of the column reached him, and he raised his left fist, which was the signal, and Garrison made the turn and slowed to a walk, and at the second house on the left, a tan single story with a small porch and a desert willow in the yard that was just coming into bloom, late and purple, Garrison stopped his bike and cut the engine. The rider behind him cut his engine. The rider behind that one. The sound moved down the column like a wave going out, engine after engine going quiet in sequence, the rumble falling away section by section until the whole of it, all 512 machines, all 512 riders, was standing in silence on Clover Road, and the side lots and the road shoulder and the service lane behind the houses where they had spilled over when the street ran out of room. Joseph City had never held a sound like that silence. It pressed against the desert morning like something physical, like the moment after a bell stops and the air still knows the shape of the note. Nona Birch's front door opened. Cora came out onto the porch. She was wearing the yellow shirt again, the one with the pocket on the chest, and she had a new braid in her hair, carefully done, and she was wearing her sneakers that used to light up. She stood on the porch and looked at the road, and the road looked back at her. Not a single engine, not a single voice. 512 riders standing beside their bikes in the gold morning light with their boots in the dust and their hands at their sides, and the desert willow blooming purple above the fence line, and the sky hard blue above all of it, and Garrison Delk, 54 years old, standing at the front of all of it, with the iron beard and the Ash Creek Riders patch and the road-worked hands and the callus on his left palm, looking at her. She looked at him. She was 7 years old, and she had carried a letter folded soft in her pocket for 6 months, and she had waited 3 hours and 22 minutes on a wooden bench, without crying, and she had asked a man she did not know if he would be kind, and she had accepted his answer and filed it where it belonged. Now she looked at 512 people who had ridden from every direction of the compass to be parked on her grandmother's street before 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and she made the face that is not quite surprise and not quite relief, the one that had no clean name, and it was wider this time. Her hand went to the pocket on the chest of her yellow shirt, to the place where the letter was. She touched it once through the fabric, then she raised her right hand and waved. One small wave, slow, deliberate, the way you wave at someone you recognize. 512 riders raised their hands and waved back, one broad sweep, and Joseph City was quiet except for the desert wind in the willow and something that Curtis Vane, from the far end of the line where he was riding sweep and where nobody could see his face, described later only as the sound that 500 grown people make when they are all trying not to make a sound at the same time. Garrison walked up to the porch. He had not planned what he was going to say, and he did not need to. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at Cora, and she looked at him, and he said, "I told him. He knows you waited." She looked at him for a moment, and then she looked at the street and the column of riders and the morning light on the chrome, and she said, "Did he come?" Garrison said, "Not today. He's getting help." A pause, in which the desert wind came through the willow and the purple blossoms moved. "Can I keep writing him letters?" she asked. "Yes," Garrison said. "He'll write you back." She nodded. She put her hand over the pocket again, over the letter, and kept it there for a moment. Then she sat down on the porch step and looked at the column, all the bikes and all the riders, and she said, in the straightforward way she said all things, "They all came for me?" "All of them," Garrison said. She appeared to do some math. "Are there 500? 512, he said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the riders in the morning light. "That's a lot," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She thought about it one more time. "Then, okay," she said, and leaned her elbows on her knees, and looked at the road full of people who had come for her, and the expression on her face was something that Nona Birch, watching from the doorway with her glasses on their chain and her hand over her mouth, described to anyone who asked for the rest of her life as the exact look of a child who has just learned that the world is bigger and kinder than the one thing that hurt her. There is a framed photograph on the wall of the Ash Creek Riders Bay in Winslow, hung at eye level beside the window that faces east, where the morning light comes in gold, and low the same way it came in over Clover Road on that Saturday. It shows 512 motorcycles on a residential street in Joseph City, Arizona, taken from above by a drone that Beto Salcedo had thought to bring without telling anyone. And in the photograph, the column stretches from one edge of the frame to the other, and then beyond it. And at the far left of the visible street, at the very front, there is a small porch with a desert willow beside it and a child sitting on the bottom step with her elbows on her knees, looking at the road. That is all you can tell from the photograph, that a lot of people showed up for someone small. Below the photograph, on a strip of painted wood, it says, Cora, 512, August, and the date. The Ash Creek Riders hold a run every year on that date, beginning in Holbrook at the bus depot and ending in Joseph City on Clover Road, and the number that shows up has never been smaller than the first year and has been larger every year since. Raymond Cura spent 4 months in a residential treatment program in Flagstaff. He works now at a building supply outside Winslow. He has a small place with a yard. He and Cora write letters, back and forth, the way the Christmas letter always promised they would, and Cora keeps them in a shoebox under her bed, and she does not carry them in her pocket anymore, because she does not need to. Garrison Delk rides the annual run every year in the same road-dusted cut, at the front of the column, beside Roy Senda. His daughter met him in Flagstaff for coffee in the spring of the year after the depot, and then again the spring after that, and the spring after that, and the door he has been learning to walk through is still in the process of opening, which is how doors work when the hinges have rusted from long disuse. They open slowly. But they open. The Ash Creek Riders Treasury established a fund named for no one in particular, listed in the club's records only as the Standing Promise, that covers incidental costs for children in the high desert corridor who are waiting somewhere and need a reliable answer. 3 families in the first year, 7 in the second, 11 in the third. The number goes up. There is a child somewhere right now, sitting on a bench or a porch step or the edge of a curb, holding something in her hands that was promised a long time ago, watching a door. She does not know what sound 500 engines make when they crest the hill. She will find out. The road that scared you most is the one that carried 512 people to a 7-year-old girl's porch. And what you heard that morning, what you felt in your sternum before you could name it, was not the rumble. It was what the rumble turned into when the engines cut and the silence came, soft and enormous, and 512 hands went up.